Do what thou will be the whole piece of law.
Welcome back, or if this is your first time, welcome. Today, I'm going to give you a continuation of the already pre-established strategy. This is going to be a secondary monitor entertainment type of video. There's going to be a little bit of visual editing, not much, but just know that it's great if you want to do your chores, eat, do something else. I will serenade you on a theory that I think only I have heard of while you do whatever you need to do. So, what is this theory that only I have heard of? Well, it is something called warrantyism, and you may ask, what is it? But that's something we have to get to at a later point. We have to get to the founder first, who basically has nothing on him. He doesn't even have a photo. So when I give you the name Henry Hughes, you probably will not know who I'm talking about, which is completely fine. Something that you do need to know, though, is he was born in the good old year of our Lord, 1829. And if that doesn't tell you everything you need to know, the second thing that will illuminate what makes that so important is that he's an American, and the Civil War ended in 1865. So obviously he's going to be writing some schizophrenic nonsense about his ideas of slavery, considering he grew up in the South. I'm really going to skim on his early life or anything else because there's really nothing. He went to college, he got a degree, and he wrote a book called The Treatise of Sociology, which is mainly what I want to kind of try and digest. By the way, he's not a sociologist. He's just one of the first people to ever use the term, so he kind of means it in a different way than we would mean it today. When he says sociology, he doesn't mean the communication between people. He means the social order type deal. Because you have to remember, when thinking about how this man thinks, is that he comes from a time when Southern honor meant a lot, well, at least to the people in the South, and that 18th century spirit, which doesn't really have time to die out yet. This is the peak of those times, and you need to remember that this is going to be very important to this person living in Mississippi at this time. And his degree was in law. He got it from Oakland College. And of course, like almost every other person that I talk about on this channel, he had a grandiose sense of self. This grandiose sense of self manifested in a lot of his works, saying, like in his weekly diaries, saying he was destined to become, quote unquote, the greatest mortal man that can be. But don't let that distract you. Don't let that impair your judgment. He wanted to be informed, which is a great thing to say nowadays because most people will just take whatever you read or see or hear or digest and just immediately blurt it out without any second thought. Parroting puppets, if you will. No, but that's not that video. He wanted to gather the summation of human knowledge, aka quote unquote the whole circuit. So he obviously took a trip to Europe in 1854, and as he was on this European trip, he had put together his accumulated knowledge into the Treatise on Sociology, Theoretical and Practical, which, I'm going to spoil it, did not sell well. It did about as well as if I published a book with absolutely no marketing and my crazy ideas on the view of the world while also believing myself to be the greatest mortal man that ever existed, and that it was God's plan to reveal the entire philosophy of the human mind and to reform legislation and reveal perfect politics to be the leader of the world. That would be, first of all, a direct quote from Henry Hughes, and second of all, how I would write my book and how well that would sell. But what have I been skirting around this entire time? And why have I been listening to Dixie this whole time? The instrumental, at least. It is a really good military march. But anyway, this Treatise of Sociology, remember, he's using this word for the first time, so he gets to define it, and he's basically going to define it as the way that society should be run. So that basically translates the title of his book into the way I think society should be run, the theoretical and the practical. But I think nothing does more justice to his ideas and how he's going to write the rest of the book, because I'm not going to go into the book unless you want me to, unless I get 10,000 likes. We bring back the like goals from 2016. Oh, I really am on a nostalgia trip. Unless I get 10,000 likes on this video, and then I'll do a whole review on the Treatise of whatever, Sociology, Theoretical and Practical by Henry Hughes. I'm gonna redo the preface and then summarize the ideas, because I feel the preface does most of the heavy lifting besides the actual theoretical and practical. This gives kind of the idea that he's shooting for when he says, quote, "Some people think that the societary organization of the United States South is morally evil and civilly inexpedient. Others who understand the working principles of what is called slavery do not think so. They think that it is both morally and civilly good. This is their opinion of its great and well-known essentials. These, they think, ought to be unchanged and perpetual. This treatise essays, amongst other things, to expound the philosophy of the perpetualists, or in other words, to express some of the views of the Southern people on the subject of slavery." So, in so many words, what is his ideology? Well, as you could probably tell throughout that preface, he kind of softballs slavery. However, he doesn't say that it's a completely bad thing or a completely holistic good thing, which is kind of the dialogue at the time, because it's spooling up to the Civil War, and you got the Northerners being like, "This is an abominable evil. We cannot stand by this for one more metric instant." And all the plantation owners in the South are going, "This is a great, amazing thing. Our entire economy would collapse. You would lose everything if we didn't have this great, amazing thing, so why not just keep it going forever?" But Henry Hughes, the brave middleman, decides to stick up for those horrible oppressed slave owners and say, slavery has its cons, but it is a good thing. So here's how I'm gonna fix it. So Henry Hughes, in this book, will go out to try and reform, quote unquote, slavery, because his first way of softballing this is by saying it shouldn't be called slavery. What we have now is slavery. What we should transfer to is my system called warrantyism. Now, warrantyism is a bit of a weird thing in what we're going to be talking about for the rest of this, and warrantyism sees, first of all, an authoritarian state. Wow, what a surprise. The guy who thinks he is literally God's gift to man to fix everything thinks that he is going to have an authoritarian government to do everything. What a big surprise. But he also takes a weirdly communistic tint, because in the first 100 pages or so, he kind of goes into it, and one of the first things he says as he begins to lay out his beliefs is that the master and slave dynamic is really the problem, because it involves the deprivation of rights from all parties and it gives them to another, and he equates this to the relations of landlord and tenant, which is radical, needless to say, of the time. And if he were in charge, he would totally abolish the entire thing, which I think is odd. But putting the slightly communistic tint aside, because it doesn't really do anything except color his arguments, is the relationship between the warrantor and the warrantee. Now, the warrantor would be the person who is technically, quote-unquote, owning the land. Warrantors would be your plantation owners, and the warrantees would be the people who worked on the plantations. So how is this any better than the system that they are trying to replace/reform? Well, Henry Hughes says that neither of these people would be fully deprived of their rights. Now, you may say, fully deprived? How would the people who own the plantations be deprived of their rights? It sounds like they have the entirety of the rights in this scenario. And how would the people who work on the plantations maintain their rights when it seems like they have no agency whatsoever? Well, Henry Hughes has an answer for you. Because both of them are effectively, for lack of a better term, slaves to the state. It's like anarcho-monarchism, where you have an anarchy, but it is one big guy at the top to make sure nothing gets too out of hand. Or as I like to call it, a parent-child relationship. Because the way that Henry Hughes sees this, first of all, there is labor that must be performed under coercion from the state for free, which is what the warranties provide. And then there is a second obligation from the warrantors, which is to uphold the social order. Mainly, the way I kind of see it, in a way that would describe it the best, is warrantyism is mainly trying to coagulate and mold the social order into one effective ball or shape. Because the warranties prop up society, and in turn are provided with everything they need to survive. They're provided with other necessities. He doesn't really lay out a full economy for this, but the warrantors would maintain the non-controllable things by the state, because he goes by the kind of older idea that there are 7 ways or aspects of a society, them being economic, political, hygienic, philosophic, aesthetical, ethical, and religious. He thought the state needed to control the economic, political, hygienic, philosophic, and aesthetical. The other 2, ethical and religious, would be imposed not by force from above by the state, but more by a social contract by everyone involved to preserve the social order. Now, this is where the warrantors come into play. The warrantors are themselves also slaves, but not to any man, as the warrantees might be, not slaves, but answerable to the warrantors. The warrantors are answerable to the state, and the state would issue punishments based on their conformity to the social order, possibly for not meeting quotas, any of these other things. And he tries to go over multiple times that warranteeism is meant to preserve and curtail the rights of both parties. However, he also tries to answer the issue of, well, if warrantees provide free labor, then how do they survive? And he says the free laborer would have their wage determined not by their needs or not by a flat rate, but by market forces. And I am really confused as to how that would work. However, I feel like that would involve something really weird coming about, in the sense of that's kind of like your dollar rate, like 1 day's or 1 hour's free laborer's labor, and you could maybe back a currency off. No, I'm not gonna think of that. And of course, because he was in the South, none of this is like the egalitarian style of Roman or ancient slavery, where it's just like, oh, you lost to us in a fight, you're a slave now. It's not based on your race or any other distinguishing characteristics. You lost, you're a slave now. It's not like that, because he also said there had to be ethnical qualifications, which I read an analysis paper of the treatise. In case you're wondering, its title is Curran on Ambrose, Henry Hughes, and Pro-Slavery Thought in the Old South. But it brought up something interesting that I hadn't thought of, because if you just say that this is warranteeism, it's basically just slavery plus, but you say, wow, slavery is so great, what if we just expanded it to the slavers too? So now we have dual slavery. But this analyst points out that quote-unquote pure warranteeism would have allowed anyone to be warrantees, which I had never considered until this guy brought it up, that when Henry Hughes said an ethnical qualification, he meant that he was basically just trying to reform whatever slavery was at the current point. I thought he was just super schizophrenic and liked the idea of slavery and was just like, yeah, we should go back to the Roman style of slavery, which is what I think when I think about slavery. I'm not going to elaborate on that, but the paper brings up that it would have been absolutely disgusting, pure warranteeism, to Henry Hughes, because it would have allowed for interracial marriage among warrantees, which was just completely incomprehensible to his tiny southern mind. But that's the basis of the thought, and if you ever wanted to institute it, I would imagine that it would work somewhat like a weird anarcho-communism, but everyone is also subservient to the ruling party state apparatus thing. And in case the benefits of this system are not clear, Henry Hughes does not really get too specific, but says that both are morally and inclined by the state to have mutual benefits to each other, quote-unquote, class. Which I have no idea how that would work. He doesn't really do a good job of explaining how that would work, but that's what he thought. and he died serving the Confederacy in the Civil War in 1862. So he wasn't really against slavery, but he also wasn't really pro-slavery either. The analysis paper makes it sound like it wants to try and reform slavery, but it seems like he kind of wants to make his own thing, his divine form of government inspired by God, God's gift to man, and God's gift to government, aka slavery 2.0, the government. But yeah, I don't see enough people covering this, and I can see, and you can probably hear why, because it's just nuts. If you made it this far, just to wind it down, I'd like to thank you for watching. Anything you do, whether you like, comment, subscribe, all three, hit the bell, hype the video, whatever, all of it is appreciated and makes my little heart glow with joy. And the thing that I would appreciate most is if you left a comment with some criticism for this video. I am fully aware that its production value is low. It will come back at the beginning of March. But anything beyond that, microphone issues, speech patterns, anything that can make this easier to consume, I would appreciate it. And since you made it to the end, you have a concrete picture of what I have to offer. So in exchange for your criticism, I will offer you some advice. If you believe that you are sent by God to mold the morals, politics, and entire worldview of the world, and you set out to write a book that will lay out your ideas for said changes to the world as divined by God, I would pick a better idea to elaborate upon than slavery.